another episode of Dialogue with Darwin, a series where we bring together leaders and veterans from across industries to share their evolution journeys and their insights about the future. Today, we are joined by a leader who dons many hats, an author, angel investor, and a mentor to many entrepreneurs in the country. Mr. T.N. Hari is an IIT IIM alumnus who has started his career with Tata Steel and now is leading the people function at Bigbasket. Hari has played an active role in shaping up several startups and through his roles has pushed the ecosystem to rethink the entire talent and business dynamic. Thank you so much for joining us, Hari. A very warm welcome to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Gautami, for having me. It's entirely my privilege to be on your podcast or whatever you call it.
Thank you so much, Hari. To begin with, I'm more curious to learn how the journey of a full circle has been for you. You started with Tata Steel and now after 20 years, again, becoming a Tata enterprise. Are there any constants that still remain that you can connect with how you have experienced the organization? Or I think it's not right to call it an organization. It's a body of its own, right? Are there constants that you still relate to? And is there like great evolution that has happened, that you see that it has changed a great deal in these years?
Yes, clearly Tatas have changed a great deal over the years, I would say. So Tata Steel was the first company I worked for, joined the company from campus at IIM Calcutta. And I was very keen to work for an engineering company. So the purpose of my doing an MBA was not really to get a foothold outside of engineering, but to actually get a more holistic understanding of how companies operate. And I consciously chose Tata Steel to begin my career and understand engineering on the ground as it happened. But at some point of time, I just felt that, Tata Steel was too large an organization, was not agile enough. I was a bit of an intrapreneur within the company, a bit of a rule breaker, and wanted to work in a more fast-paced environment. And that's how I moved on to this company called Daksh, which was a startup in those days. And the last 20 years have been with a string of high-growth startups, very, very exciting. And it's very interesting that, Bigbasket also found a home back in the Tatas. So for me, as you said, it's, going around the circle 360 degrees all the way. But in these 20 years, I clearly have seen that the Tatas have also evolved a lot. I think they've become far more agile. And the very fact that they are acquiring a string of startups, 1MG, Bigbasket, and a whole host of them, I think they're clearly realizing that, if they have to be relevant in today's India, they need to, work with some of these startups and actually acquire, because the best way to create entrepreneurial energy is to acquire entrepreneurs rather than getting managers and other entrepreneurs to become entrepreneurial. And that's what they're trying to do.
Now, on that note, we thought there is, a subcontext that we wanted to double down on with you, something that runs through organizations for years and finds its own way to metamorphosize based on the changes that happens, right? And it's the culture that actually binds these organizations together. So, and today we are all posed with a new challenge in terms of how can we still retain a great culture, or more to say, our own culture that we've built for the organization in a virtual world, right? Because I think we no longer have the levers that we used to have to communicate this or propagate this, right? So how do you see this entire aspect of culture getting translated from physical to virtual world?
Right. So, preserving culture, creating as well as preserving culture is slightly easier in the physical world, because in the physical world, you can, read body language, you can understand eye contact. And these are very, very powerful, intangible tools to driving culture. And the feedback cycles are also much shorter in a physical context. For example, if you do something or you see someone doing something which is not in line with your culture, then the feedback can be pretty quick. Whereas in a virtual context, you don't get to know a lot of things that are happening. So the feedback cycles also become longer. So I think it's not as easy in a virtual context of setting culture and preserving culture. But having said that, I think this is something that is beyond anyone's control, the pandemic and the virtual world, the hybrid world that exists today. So you have to learn how to adapt and make, even be able to retain your culture even in this particular context. So I think what you could do is in situations where you think some element of culture has been reinforced by a certain behavior, or some individuals have gone against the grain of culture, use those opportunities, to go deeper into that and explain why it goes against the culture of the company.
How do people pick what behaviors are valuable for their organization? And how do you go about figuring out if this culture is right for our context? Right? Because it's unique in every place.
Correct.
How do we go about figuring out, hey, is this right for us particularly?
Right. So I think it's very important to understand that, apart from very toxic cultures, there is no right and wrong culture. So a lot of people seem to think, what is a good culture? What's a bad culture? If you keep toxic cultures aside, there is no good or bad culture. Now, building on this, there's no right or wrong culture. I think there's no right or wrong personality. All of us have different personalities, right? Some of us are very analytical, very numbers oriented. Some of us are very creative. Some of us love meeting new people and love performing sales roles. Some of us love building deeper relationships with fewer individuals. So we're all very different. No personality is right or wrong. We have to make our personality work for us. We have to know what our strengths are. So culture is an organization's personality. There is no right or wrong personality. There's no right or wrong culture. So I think the culture in a startup simply equals founders. It's as simple as that. For a startup, culture equals founders. What are the values that founders bring? What are the behaviors they think have made them successful over a period of hiring, through screening and selection, and in managing performance? Those kind of behaviors which they think are important get driven and built in the entire organization. So as long as founders are active in a company, I would say culture equals founders. But as the startup begins to scale, as more and more leadership comes from outside, some degree of churning happens and the company finds a bit of other things as well to come in, and that becomes the culture of a period of time. So there's no right or wrong culture. I can tell you so many stories about to show you that there's no right or wrong culture, but let me just stop here for the moment.
No, absolutely, Hari. I think that completely makes sense. And I'm also happy that you very clearly pointed out that, it's indexed on the founders and the behaviors that they bring to the organization, right?
Right.
How do you see culture responding to the change that is happening externally, right? And other incidents that you saw that it definitely, of course, pandemic being one of the most recent one that we can recollect, but other incidents that are basically pushing culture to metamorphosize or to change.
Yeah. So as I said, that there's no right or wrong culture. The other important myth about culture is that you can change culture easily. So that myth also needs to be broken. It's very difficult for companies to change who they are. So it's very difficult for us to change who we are. Lifelong, we remain who we are. If we love building deeper relationships with a few people, lifelong, we'll remain that way. We might add a few elements on the periphery, but our core remains the same. But having said that, I would say the best way to adapt is that if all of the people in the company, or at least a good number of leaders, they have two traits. One, which is being open and not believing in the not invented here. Sometimes, there's a strong belief that not invented here syndrome. So I think that not invented here syndrome does not allow you to adapt to changes. So if you don't have that syndrome, if you're very open-minded to listening to new ideas, that's one very important element of adapting to change. The second component is also having inclusion. And, a lot of things are spoken about inclusion these days, diversity and inclusion. The power of inclusion is that you are able to get a large number of ideas. And by getting these large number of ideas, you will figure out what is relevant in a different context. So I would say openness and inclusivity are two very powerful elements of a culture to be able to adapt.
Hari, and moving on to another segment, where we want to know a little about you personally, right, and the evolution that you've been going through, be it in the recent past and in your entire professional journey. So starting with, and I think this goes for every individual to reflect upon, right, what is one habit that you've picked up over the last 1.5 years of living through the pandemic?
One habit that I have picked up is trying to be effective in a virtual context. So I don't know whether you call that a habit or a skill, but let me just anyway say this. So I think being able to be effective in a virtual context, I think is something I've leveraged very well.
Now, Hari, just going with your book title, Saying No to Jugaad.
Yeah.
Is there one Jugaad in HR that you will say no to?
Oh, many jugaads I would say no to. If, for example, if you need to do something and if something has gone wrong and you need to fix it with jugaad, I'd rather go and tell the person, I'm sorry, this thing has gone wrong, but I'm not going to do this. We'll fix it in the long term. So say sorry, and rather than try and do jugaad and not keep the stakeholder completely informed and transparent. So I have been very much against jugaads of all kinds.
Thank you for that. One book that you would recommend a team member as a must read?
I liked multiple books. So, for instance, there is this book about Abraham Lincoln. That's a team of rivals by, I think it's Doris, I forget the author's name, Doris Goodwin. So there she talks about how Abraham Lincoln won the election, the nomination for the Republican president candidate. But he brought all the losers. He, brought them together as part of his team. And all of them, fought with him very vehemently for that presidential nominee. And he brought all of them as part of his cabinet, like the way Obama brought Hillary into his cabinet. That's how you bring in great ideas. You encourage and harness dissent. That book talks about, it's a very fat book, but very amazingly written. I liked all the biographies of Mahatma Gandhi. There are multiple biographies. I've read more than one. Every book has been inspiring. And the person, the more you read about that person, the more you realize what a unique individual this person was. So some of these, I have not been particularly inspired by management books, although I write management books myself. But my inspiration is drawn from history. They are drawn from adventure. So I've loved reading books on Shackleton, Scott, and a few other adventurers. So, Mallory, who almost climbed Everest, who made 3 attempts. The last attempt, he died on the, mountain. Nobody knows what happened, whether he really climbed or on the way up, he died. So those books I find very inspiring. History, books from history, from adventure, from political leadership. Typically, management books have never inspired me a lot.
Ironically to say, when you are actually inspiring folks who are trying to do well in management, your books kind of help all of us. But yeah, interesting to know, Hari. And last 2 things. One, is there, I know it's not the best thing to look for advice or give advice, but is there one advice that you would like to share with any aspiring HR leader?
So I would say, typically HR folks find it slightly difficult to understand technology and business, and that's perfectly all right. But I think they need to demonstrate a deep understanding of people and demonstrate empathy. I find it very disappointing when they don't do this well. And when they just begin to parrot management constraints with their people. So I think that is not what I expect. So my advice is, have a backbone, represent the people, understand their needs well, demonstrate a lot of empathy when you deal with them. Don't throw policies at them. Don't throw management, constraints at them. Understand their problems and stand up for them with management. That's my advice to HR.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's absolutely right that we keep the balance. Everyone is now talking about how HR needs to pick the context on business, but I think it's good to focus on the other half. So the last thing to close with, Hari, is there a motto you live by professionally and personally?
Difficult to say that. Maybe a couple of things. One is I have learned the importance of resilience over the years, which is reflected in the phrase, get up, dress up and show up, which is come what may, you should do this, which is, that's a phrase which actually it's metaphorical, I would say, get up, dress up and show up, which really means that, whatever the circumstances, continue with that. Don't give up easily. Just because you find something not working, don't give up. Don't stop doing the boring things. If they're important, just continue doing them. I think that's one thing I've learned over the years. Very unglamorous to say this, but that's, I think, very powerful. I've found that. Other is I've liked helping authentic and genuine people. And I go out of my way to help authentic and genuine people do whatever is necessary. I take a lot of time out from my schedule to help such people. And that's something I found very fulfilling. And that's something I live by as well.
That's really great, Hari. And thank you so much for spending the time with us. I think the entire conversation has not only been engaging, but very, very insightful. And like you mentioned about the book, The Team of Rivals, I think any conversation is extremely insightful when there are opposing views to the norm we subscribe to, right? And
yes,
that's what you've
yes.
done. Time and again, you pushed every one of us to rethink the norm and to rethink the dynamics if they are, if it is time to evolve. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Gautami, for having me. Thank you so much.